Welcome to Mentor Spotlight series, a live conversation to explore the role of mentorship in developing the professional identity of physicians. I'm your host, Javier de la Maza. I'm a pediatric emergency doctor and the executive director of Ars Medica. And I'm really excited today because we have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Juan Pablo Beca. He's an honorary member of the Chilean Academy of Medicine, a mentor, and an international leader in the field of bioethics. Dr. Beca has been supporting clinical teams and patients and their families to navigate through complex decision-making processes for more than 30 years. So it's really an honor to have you here, Juan Pablo. Welcome. I must say that we are both Chileans. This is the first time that we have as a guest someone from my home country, and we both speak Spanish also. But we're gonna have this conversation in English because we know that most of our audience right now is based in the US and in the United Kingdom. So again, welcome Juan Pablo, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you very much, Javier. It's a great honor, really, and it's a challenge to be here in this interview. I will just answer your questions and follow your guidelines.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I think that to start it off, it will be great if you can tell us a bit more about yourself. And especially, I would love to hear about what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine.
All right. Well, I've been a physician for 55 years. So it's a long way, and I've gone through different stages, not because of changes, radical changes, but because of evolution into different challenges and different projects. Now, as a high school student, I always liked more than science, really, I always liked social service. And that was a great motivation for me. Now, my father was a professor in psychiatry, and so that was a great influence, seeing physicians all along and friends and so on. So I went to medical school, a little bit thinking about psychiatry, but my main motivation was service for those who suffered. So I thought mental suffering is tough, so that could be a way. But during my medical studies, I discovered pediatrics, and I was moved by the undernutrition that was the main issue. We had a high infant mortality because of undernutrition and infections. So I thought, this is just what I want to do. So I went into pediatrics, and I had a fellowship to be trained in a public hospital associated with Universidad de Chile, that's Hospital Calvo Maquena. We have two pediatric big hospitals in Santiago, Hospital Roberto del Rio and Calvo Maquena. So I made my training there, and after that, we had a project as a national program that those who have a fellowship to train in a specialty have to go a minimum for 2 or 3 years to a hospital in province. So I was sent to Antofagasta. So I made my stage in Antofagasta, working with very poor people, and I was really touched about suffering of people there, and the nutrition in one way, but many neurological damage, small children. So I thought, wow, this is a big problem. and nobody really cares much about it. So I thought this has to be go to prevention, and that was to prevent birth asphyxia. And that meant to really develop neonatology. And neonatology was not a big issue in our country in those years. I'm speaking years about 68, 1970. So I applied and I had a fellowship to train as neonatologist in England, in Hammersmith Hospital. I spent 2 years there making research and also making rotations in duties and working in the intensive care. There was no intensive care for neonatology. There was no intensive care in pediatrics in those stages in our country. So when I got back, I managed with a friend of mine from Canada to create a first very small intensive care for neonates, which was in our hospital, Calvo Maquena, where we had a premature center, but there was no intensive care. So that was the first unit for intensive care for neonates. And I told my colleagues from other hospitals, this is not to have the best or the first one, it is to prove that we can do it in our country. So we worked for 2 or 3 years and we proposed a national program for neonates called to decrease neonatal mortality and to prevent neurological damage. So this went and we created 25 intensive care units in public hospitals in Chile, from Arica to Magallanes, with a regionalization program for each one of those. So we had 90 intermediate care units in smaller cities. For example, you are now in the southern part of Chile. We created the intensive care unit from Temuco with a regionalization with Victoria and other cities.
Yeah.
And the same happened with Valdivia or with Osorno or with Concepcion and Valparaiso, and 5 of them in Santiago. The result of that was we really decreased neonatal mortality to half of what it was in 5 years.
Wow.
And then I created an intensive care unit in a private hospital, which is Clínica Alemana. And that was the first private neonatal intensive care unit. Now, that was in 1981. I continued working for Universidad de Chile, and then we created in Hospital Calvo Maquena a small ethics committee to analyze the problem of having very many neurologically damaged kids in intensive care, occupying almost all of it. So there was no screening or triage criteria to admit. And that was our problem. I got so touched with bioethics about that I managed and went to Georgetown and had the intensive care in Georgetown. I happened to meet there Edmund Pellegrino, who really was an impact for myself, and came back to Chile with much enthusiasm with bioethics. So I was changing my mood, my vocation for service, from social service to pediatric service, neonatal service, and now bioethical service. And I've done a career in bioethics where there was nothing here, and we created a group of work and so on. And then our rector in Universidad de Chile applied to have in Chile the PAHO first regional program for bioethics in Latin America and the Caribbean. And he asked me to take over for that program. I refused it, but I happened to help Dr. Julio Montt, who was named the director of that program. I didn't want to leave my clinical practice. That was the reason not going to take over directing that program.
Yeah.
So I devoted half of my time there and half of my time in clinical practice. So I could manage to combine theoretical bioethics with clinical practice. And that's my motivation. That's what I am. I am a clinician who works in bioethics. I couldn't be only a theoretical ethicist. And times went over, and then another faculty of medicine was created in 2003, and I was called to direct a program for teaching bioethics. And my answer was, okay, but only if we work to create a really powerful center of bioethics, to develop the discipline and to open our doors for people from other places.
Yeah.
And that's the Centro de Bioética that I founded in Universidad del Desarrollo. Okay, this is 17 years ago. And then we developed postgraduate courses, a diploma, and afterwards a master program where Mariana made her program with us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a huge and long career,
Evolution.
but
Yeah.
it has, the main line is just the same one, a vocation for service and teaching. And I changed from pediatrics to neonatology and then to bioethics. In between, some research, publications and books and so on, but always with the same motivation.
Yeah. No, so many things stand out from your journey, your professional journey, and I love how you highlight the fact that there's one common thread all along this vocation for service, to care for the suffering, this human impulse, if you may, that has given you, the inspiration, the energy, perhaps to develop so many different areas. And I must say that it's really an honor to be having this interview with you. I work in pediatric emergency care, so I know I've seen the robust infrastructure that we have to care for children, at different levels. So it's amazing to hear the story of someone who was part of building all of that. Um, I want to move on and ask you about what will you say are the characteristics that make up a good doctor?
I would say good and strong knowledge of scientific basis, all together with human virtues. And I quote Pellegrino here with the virtues of medicine. And that means humility, compassion, integrity, self enhancement and postergation, and prudence. So if somebody really wants to be a good physician, has to have compassion with those who suffer and need to have the abilities for communication, but as personal sensibility, and postpone self-interest. And that just goes easily once you really think it over. If you really feel what is medicine for, it's not for the physician, it's for the patient. And a patient is a person who is suffering because of disease, either acute or chronic or congenital or metabolic or infectious or COVID or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think professional virtues are essential, but there's not enough education, and the subject is not really in the daily conversation,
Yeah.
but it should be.
Yeah. That's part of the challenge, and this idea of postponing self-interest, also humility, all of that. It's something that other guests that we have had before also have mentioned. The important of being humble in your career is so challenging, some at times. But I really appreciate that you bring it up also, and you remind us of the importance of humility and these other virtues as well.
The problem is that you can't buy virtues in the supermarket, but you can buy technology.
Yeah,
Now, virtues, you have to acquire them, maybe because you discover them in somebody, and that goes to the mentoring. And you discover somebody who really has all those attitudes, and then you think it over, and then you try for through personal reflections to say why this guy is in that way, why is he so close to people, why is this person so sensible that discovers something that I didn't really notice in the patient, because there's something there in some people, and then you discover it through other ones,
yeah,
and then you think it over, and then you try to culture virtues. You
yeah,
don't learn them reading, or you don't learn them in a lecture, but in practice. But you have to have some knowledge and some thought about it and some reflection.
yeah,
I think those who have much experience but never think it over, I think it's really useless. But if you really have experience and you have seen many diseases and you have seen many patients in similar conditions, and you discover that each patient is alone, single, suffering, and one can help, not much, but something. And then you do whatever you can. So the mean is not to resuscitate somebody and save lives. No, no, no. It's not something spectacular. It's very simple, but very deep. If you
yeah,
really get in touch what's happening in that person that who is suffering a disease.
yeah. And I this idea of a combination of both action and reflection as being part of the process in for acquiring these virtues, cultivating your identity as a physician, that makes a lot of sense to me. And also, I really like how you bring up the importance of mentoring and the importance of how uh, we model behaviors, when we relate with one another. Human beings, we learn from each other, and we learn attitudes, we learn beliefs, and we learn behaviors, and that really shapes the way we are at the end of the day, at all levels. And in medicine, that's so important. That also defines how we are as doctors, how we care for our patients. And I would love to hear about the mentors. What mentors did you have at these different stages of your professional journey? If you could share with us about a little bit about that as well.
I think in Chile we don't speak very much about mentors. It's not really a language that we use. Maybe we should, but it's very occasional. Now, I do remember people, some physicians that had a strong influence in me.
Mm-hmm.
In pediatrics, someone that was really an impact for me because of his scientific structure. Another one because of his human structure, being very, very not very preoccupied from the scientific basis. Another one was really somebody, a leader in primary care. And then different aspects. But these three persons were very strong in their fortitudes, in their attitudes. And I think they did have many of the virtues I mentioned. And that was the impact. And they were not the big leaders, but the people, working in a very deep way and not having the power of being directors or full professors and so on.
Yeah. Could you maybe share with us maybe one story of how maybe one of these mentors had an influence in you as a younger physician?
It could be with a nephrologist doing one of the first dialysis in small children and staying all overnight with the patient in the public hospital voluntarily. And I went with him in that challenge. So we really celebrated, and we are happy because the kid began, passing urine again and so on. Really enjoying the success and with passion. I never can forget about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know that in Chile we don't use the term mentor a lot, but we both know what we mean by that. And I would imagine that you have mentor others also along the way. How would you describe your role as a mentor throughout the years, and your experience also influencing the career of others?
Well, if one defines mentor as somebody who is a good example and a guidance, that's one definition. The other one would be who is really your advisor in a thesis, in a doctoral, in a PhD research, and so on. I have worked with several people doing their research to get a master's degree in bioethics. I have been their guidance, but I think that main influence as mentor has been when I have worked in clinical practice and also in ethics consultation, doing it all together with another one, just showing how I perform that consultation and sharing it,
Mm.
and then discussing each case by case. Others would be to help them and encourage them to write a paper. And then I've done this, for example, with undergraduate students. I want you to be the first author. I will help you. And then, for example, very recently, a girl who is in the internship, and she volunteered to go to the hospital in the pandemic, where interns were asked not to go because of the problems and risks. And then she volunteered to go, and then she had a very nice experience with a very poor, lonely old man who was angry and didn't care to talk to anybody. So she sat with the man, put her hands, and kept quiet. And then the man started talking and telling her the whole history. When she told me this experience, I told her, why don't you write it down and give it some deep thought, which she did. And then I told her, now let's send this to a journal. And with the title, The Need and the Role that a medical student can have in the clinical relation in a public hospital. It will be published in Revista Médica de Chile next month. And she's the main author. I'm the co-author. This is an example of, I would say, mentoring, because she didn't realize she just happened to have a very emotive experience, and that was it. And it was suddenly she told me, I said, there's something here. Give it more thought. Let's go deeper. This means medical students can be of big help for patients. You're not there only to learn, you're also there to serve. Now, that was, I think, something very strong that this girl learned there, but also she's communicating the experience, and she went through the literature for references. Mm. And she built up a paper based in this single case that could have been just nothing. Just nothing. A cute girl with an old man in a public hospital. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. And it goes to also the importance of generosity in the relationship, the mentorship relationship, which is something we have also learned through the Spotlight series, of how the mentor needs to be generous with the mentee. They really need to care for them and wish the best for their development, so they can thrive as learners. I would like to finalize with one last question, which is looking back at on yourself as a young doctor. What are one or two things that that you know now, after going through your journey, that you would have wanted to know back then at the beginning of your career?
Bioethics. Nobody had thought about that. In those ages, nobody had classes of medical ethics. Medical ethics was just the rules of how physicians had to behave, not to lie, not to etc. But really, ethics foundation, ethics ground for clinical decisions was never thought about. Now, this is understandable because medicine has developed in the 20th century and in the second half of the 20th century. So very complex decision was not an issue, but nowadays it is. And then a good physician needs nowadays scientific basis, technological basis, human basis, and ethical basis. Otherwise, he or she will not be a good physician. You need to involve it. Now, bioethics as a discipline was named in 1970. I became a physician in 1965, and we started with bioethics in Chile in 1990. So it's only 30 years, which is nothing in history. But it's a big difference. Medicine in these 30 years has changed largely. And then I would have liked really for my sensibility to have heard about clinical ethics when I started. And what I've tried to develop is clinical ethics altogether, not the theoretical, philosophical, or legal basis, but the clinical ethics or bedside bioethics. And this is what we do in ethics committees, but much more in ethics consultation, going to the rounds and talking with patients and talking with relatives. And I have meetings with relatives to analyze ethically the clinical decisions at end of life. So I feel a little bit of an extremist because I've been a neonatologist in the beginning of life, and now what I more do is advising at the end of life. From beginning to the end.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful journey. You have seen it all. Well, it's been a true pleasure, Juan Pablo, and an honor to talk to you, to hear about your career and the lessons you have learned. I hope we can stay in touch, of course, and continue this conversation, in the near future. And for our audience who have been watching this live stream, I also would like to thank you for joining us today. This event was brought to you by Ars Medica. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to nurturing the personal and professional growth of medical students and physicians. Our online community brings together doctors, residents, and medical students to inspire and support each other in our journey towards a meaningful practice of medicine. If you would like to join our community or learn more about our work, please go to our website. That's ars-medica.org. I repeat, ars-medica.org. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time. Thank you very much, Juan Pablo, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.